Well, for more, I can bring in now Dr. H.A. Hellyer, a senior fellow in geopolitics, international security and Middle East studies at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies in London. Thank you very much for speaking to us here on France 24. Now, we heard from our correspondent in Tehran just now. The British military is saying that Iranian gunboats have fired on a tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, possibly two. Not even 24 hours ago, world leaders were hailing the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz as a major step forward. Just how much of a setback is this latest news, in your opinion?
Thank you very much for having me. I have to say, I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact on the upcoming talks. I think there's a lot of posturing that's going on. And the Iranians are reacting to a lot of posturing going on from the United States, as well as doing their own posturing. My expectation is that the talks will go forward. I also don't expect all that much to come out of this round of talks, and I think people should lower expectations in that regard. But I think that these talks are important because they lay down the groundwork for more discussions. And the more discussions we have, then the more likely it is that we're going to come to some sort of an agreement that is going to avert more war. I should remind your viewers that JCPOA itself took a very long time, many months, and months building on, frankly, years. So I think that it's quite unrealistic to assume that one or two rounds of talks is going to result in some major breakthrough. But I think that the momentum is still there and is building, and should be taken seriously.
If you could return just to the news of today for a moment, what do you think was the US's calculation in not lifting its blockade of Iranian ports to coincide with Iran's opening of the Strait of Hormuz on Friday?
I'm glad you say it, framing it as what do I think they think, because unfortunately it's not necessarily logical. A lot of what's coming out of Washington, D.C. With regards to this war, these negotiations. But my suspicion is that the United States thought that by maintaining the blockade, there would be more pressure put on the Iranians, which would make them more agreeable at the negotiations. I don't agree with this assessment, but I think we all have to remember that initially the Trump administration thought that some sort of Venezuelan model could have been applied to Tehran, which was never going to be the case. I don't think there's any Iran expert in Washington, D.C. that would have told them that, but they really thought that this could be possible. So I don't think that it's how should we say, unexpected that this is how they would proceed. I just don't think it's going to work very well.
So you say this was a bet by the US, hoping this would apply extra pressure on Tehran. Do you think, subsequently, that the US will be surprised by Iran's U-turn here on the Strait of Hormuz, now closing it less than 20 hours after opening it?
If they are surprised, they won't show it. They'll just keep on going the way that they have been. Keeping in mind that Washington was surprised in terms of the Trump administration that the Strait of Hormuz was actually closed in the first place, during the war. They should never have been surprised. It's something that I think has shown up in war games many, many, many times over the years when it comes to Iran. But this is where we're at when it comes to policy making in Washington, D.C. now. This tiny circle that is really involved in decision making has really shrunk even further under the Trump administration. If there had been expertise brought into the room, then I think it would have been made very clear that the Strait of Hormuz would be closed. If you think that the regime is going to collapse, it's not going to collapse. If you think that it's going to fragment, it's not going to fragment. That would take a very, very long time. If you think there's going to be an uprising, that's pretty unlikely. The regime reacted very brutally in January and February. People aren't going to just jump out on the street because you said so, and so on. But they still went ahead. So I think that we have to expect, unfortunately, that there'll be a lot of ad hoc decision making over the coming weeks from a very small number of people in Washington, D.C.
Now, some tankers loaded with crude oil made their way to the Strait of Hormuz before turning back yesterday. At what point does prolonged uncertainty become as damaging to global energy markets as an outright closure of the Strait of Hormuz, in your opinion?
I think we're getting close to that. The impact of the effective closing of the strait has not yet been felt. I know that people think that it has, and that we've gone through a period and it's been rough, but we've overcome it and so on. That's simply not true. Oil tankers move really, really slowly. Hence, the absence of them is going to be felt much later. And I think that we'll begin to see the impacts in about a week or two of March, okay, of early March. It takes a good 5-6 weeks for the impacts to be felt. And then we'll be feeling the impacts for weeks thereafter, okay, because that's how long it takes for things to sort of catch up. So I think that we are going to feel that pain. And I think this is why so many governments are trying so hard to find a way to come to an agreement. Governments in the Middle East itself, so Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, that quartet, I think that they're trying very hard in that regard because especially when you think about Saudi and Egypt, they are being affected in different ways, but they're being affected very much by all of this. And of course, Turkey and Pakistan, but on a lower level. Around the world, I think you've seen support for these negotiations, particularly when it comes to the Europeans, but also I'd say elsewhere in the global South, differing perspectives. But I think people want an end to this because the repercussions are not on simply the Iranians and the Americans. And certainly not the Israelis. It's much broader than that. And I think that people are also hoping that resolving this issue will also go away to resolving Lebanon, where the Israelis have bombed and destroyed so much of, particularly south of Lebanon, but elsewhere as well. Hundreds of casualties in just the last couple of weeks, more than 1 million people displaced. This is a part of the story that I think needs to be noted and emphasized a lot more.
Dr. H.A. Hellyer, Senior Fellow in Geopolitics at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies in London. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us here.